Welcome to Histories Hall, where we bring you the most captivating stories from the past, the tales of power, betrayal, and forgotten heroes that shaped our world. Today, we're telling the story of a woman whose courage saved thousands of lives in the darkest chapter of human history. This is the story of Irena Sendler. Let's begin. In the heart of Nazi-occupied Warsaw, while the world burned and millions perished, one woman walked willingly into hell every single day. Her weapon wasn't a gun. She carried no explosives. Her tools were forged documents, coded lists, and an unshakable belief that every child's life mattered. Over the course of the Holocaust, she would save approximately 2,500 Jewish children from certain death. She would be tortured by the Gestapo, sentenced to execution, and spend decades in obscurity. Her name was Irena Sendler. And this is her story. Irena Krzyżanowska was born on February 15, 1910, in a small town near Warsaw, Poland. Her father was a country doctor, one of the few Polish physicians who treated Jewish patients during a time when anti-Semitism was woven into the fabric of European society. Young Irena watched her father care for the poorest families, regardless of their religion or ability to pay. When a typhus epidemic swept through the Jewish community, he continued treating patients even as other doctors refused. He contracted the disease himself and died when Irena was only 7 years old. Before he died, he told her something she would never forget. If you see someone drowning, you must try to rescue them, even if you cannot swim. Those words would define her life. Irena grew up, studied Polish literature at Warsaw University, and became a social worker in the city's welfare department. She married, taking the name Sendler, and by the late 1930s, she was working with Warsaw's poorest residents, many of them Jewish. She was a Catholic woman in a predominantly Catholic country, but she saw no difference between her neighbors. People were people. Suffering was suffering. Then, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Within weeks, Warsaw fell. The occupation began. And everything changed. By November 1940, the Nazis had sealed off a section of Warsaw and forced nearly 400,000 Jews into what they called the Warsaw Ghetto. Brick walls topped with barbed wire surrounded the area. Armed guards patrolled the entrances. Anyone caught trying to leave was shot on sight. Inside, conditions were unimaginable. Families were crammed into tiny apartments. Food was scarce. Disease was rampant. Typhus spread through the ghetto like wildfire. People were dying in the streets, an average of 5,000 deaths per month from starvation and disease alone. Irena Sendler watched this horror unfold from the outside. And she knew she had to act. As a social worker with Warsaw's health department, she had access to something precious: official permits to enter the ghetto to conduct sanitary inspections and check for typhus. The Nazis were terrified of disease spreading beyond the ghetto walls, so they allowed certain city workers inside. Irena volunteered immediately. She started entering the ghetto regularly, officially to inspect living conditions. But that wasn't why she was really there. Irena joined Zgota, the underground council to aid Jews, one of the only organized resistance groups in occupied Europe specifically dedicated to saving Jewish lives. Her code name was Jolanta. She became the head of Zgota's children's division. And she began planning something extraordinary: a systematic operation to smuggle Jewish children out of the ghetto and hide them with Polish families, in convents, in orphanages, anywhere they might survive. The methods she used sound like something from a spy novel, except they were real. And they were terrifying. She smuggled infants out in ambulances hidden beneath stretchers, in toolboxes, in the false bottoms of wooden crates. She sedated babies with sleeping medication so they wouldn't cry at checkpoints. Toddlers were hidden in potato sacks, in coffins marked as typhus victims, in packages labeled infectious materials that German guards wouldn't dare open. Older children escaped through the sewers, those dark, rat-infested tunnels beneath the city. Some children were led out through the basement of the old courthouse that bordered the ghetto, through secret passages in churches, through gaps in the wall guarded by bribed guards for just a few precious minutes. Every single extraction was a death sentence waiting to happen. If caught, Irena would be executed. The children would be executed. Anyone who helped would be executed, along with their entire families. The Nazis didn't make idle threats, they made examples. Public hangings. Mass shootings. Entire families murdered for hiding one Jewish child. But Irena kept going. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. She worked with a network of incredible women, other social workers, nurses, members of the underground. Together, they forged documents creating false Polish identities for the children. Catholic birth certificates. Baptism records. Every detail had to be perfect because one mistake meant death. They found families willing to take the children in, knowing the risk. They placed children in orphanages run by Catholic nuns who understood what they were hiding. They coached the children on their new names, their new stories, their new lives. Imagine the heartbreak. Imagine being a mother in the ghetto, watching your child starve, knowing that every day could be the day the Nazis come. And here comes this Polish woman, this stranger, offering to take your child. To save them. But you'll never see them again. You'll never know if they survived. Do you let them go? Do you condemn them to death in the ghetto, or do you send them away forever? Irena had to convince desperate parents to trust her with their most precious treasure. And somehow, 2,500 times, they did. But Irena did something else, something that would prove critically important years later. She kept a record. Every child she smuggled out, she wrote down their real Jewish name and their new Polish identity. She wrote down where they were hidden. She coded the information to protect it, then wrote the lists on thin tissue paper, sealed them in glass jars, and buried them in her garden beneath an apple tree. She did this so that, if the war ever ended, if any families survived, the children could be reunited with their parents or relatives. On October 20, 1943, the Gestapo came for her. Someone had talked. Someone had given her name. They arrested her at her apartment and dragged her to Pawiak Prison, the notorious Nazi detention center in Warsaw where torture was routine and survival was rare. For weeks, they interrogated her. They wanted names. They wanted her network. They wanted to know where the children were hidden. They broke her feet. They broke her legs. They beat her repeatedly, trying to force her to betray the people she worked with, to reveal the locations of the children. She told them nothing. Not one name. Not one location. Not one word about Ghetto or Jolanta or the jars buried in her garden. She endured unimaginable pain and never broke. Finally, the Gestapo sentenced her to death. She was scheduled to be executed by firing squad. But Ghetto wasn't done fighting. The underground had resources, money, connections, sympathetic people in surprising places. They bribed a German guard. On the day Irena was supposed to die, her name appeared on a list of executed prisoners. Officially, Irena Sendler was dead. But in reality, she was smuggled out of Pawiak Prison and went into hiding. For the rest of the war, she lived under a false identity, constantly moving, always in danger. But even in hiding, she continued her work. She couldn't stop. There were still children to save. When the war finally ended in 1945, Irena dug up the jars. She had the names. She had the locations. But most of the parents were dead. The Warsaw Ghetto had been liquidated in 1943. The residents had been sent to Treblinka and other death camps. The vast majority of Warsaw's Jewish population had been murdered. The children Irena had saved were often orphans. But because of those lists, some were reunited with surviving relatives. Some learned their real names for the first time in years. After the war, Poland fell under Soviet control. The communist government was not friendly to people who'd worked with Western-backed resistance groups like Gestapo. Irena's story was suppressed. She lived quietly, working as a social worker again, carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed. In 1965, Israel recognized her as righteous among the nations, an honor given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. But even then, most of the world had never heard of her. It wasn't until the 1990s that her story began to reach a wider audience. A group of high school students in Kansas, researching Holocaust heroes for a project, stumbled across a brief mention of a Polish woman who'd saved 2,500 children. They wrote a play called Life in a Jar about Irena Sendler. They performed it. They tracked her down in Warsaw, still alive at 90 years old. And slowly, the world began to learn her name. Irena was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She didn't win. When reporters asked her about her heroism, she rejected the label. "I could have done more," she said. "This regret will follow me to my death." She insisted she was not special. She had simply done what any decent person would do. She mourned the children she couldn't save more than she celebrated the ones who survived. Irena Sendler died on May 12, 2008, at the age of 98. She was buried in Warsaw with military honors. The children she'd saved, now elderly themselves, came from around the world to honor her. They told stories of the woman who'd given him life. Some had only the vaguest memories of her. Some remembered nothing at all. But they were alive because of her courage. Here's what makes Irena Sendler's story so important. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't someone with power or wealth or influence. She was a social worker. A woman in her 30s with no special training in espionage or combat. She simply saw drowning children and chose to jump in, even though she knew she might drown herself. She chose to act when inaction would have been safer, easier, and more understandable. The Holocaust is filled with stories of unspeakable evil. But it's also filled with stories like Irena's, ordinary people who chose extraordinary courage. Irena Sendler reminds us that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. It's about seeing injustice and refusing to look away. It's about saving one life, and then another, until you've changed the world. 2,500 children. 2,500 lives. 2,500 futures, children who grew up, had families, built careers, created art, told stories. Multiply that across generations, and Irena Sendler's courage echoes through thousands upon thousands of lives today. And she never wanted credit for any of it. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Histories Hall for more untold stories of courage, sacrifice, and the heroes history forgot. Drop a comment and tell us, what historical figure should we cover next? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.